So 24 annual forage, a lot of changes this year. Everybody knows that, and we'll just start going through them. Nothing new here. No expansion. Same states we've always had before. Sales closing dates same as we had before, but this year the 15th is on a Saturday, so that actually puts the sales closing date to July 17th. And this is just a graph we got from RMA when they did their webinar on May 11th. They did a webinar talking about livestock and annual forage changes, and they provided some stats, and some of the slides that we're using later on came from that webinar as well. But this just gives you an idea of where the liability industry-wide is situated around the country and the states that are available. Obviously, about 80% in Texas. That's by far the biggest state, which would make some sense. So changes. 4:30 contract change date. Everything came out April 28th, and so some of you probably looked through this as closely as I have, but we'll go through them and take any questions that you have. Jeff's going to monitor the chat. And I think you can unmute yourselves. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question at any time, that'd be fine too. We'll try and answer them as we can. And if we can't, we'll try and find an answer for you later on. So we went from way back when annual forage was 1 growing season, then we went to 4, and now we've got 12. So we got 12 growing seasons, and each one of those has a month that you can plant within, and that planting month then sets your growing season. So if you plant in the month of August, then you're in growing season 1, and the intervals are available to you as you see on this chart. And this chart is in the RI handbook. They put all of the changes to annual forage into a new exhibit in the rainfall index handbook. So that's been updated. And all the changes on annual forage are in exhibit 8, which is at the very back of the handbook. So it's kind of handy to have it all together within the handbook. And they do have a couple nice charts that we've snipped and put into our PowerPoint that you'll find in that handbook as well. So the acreage reporting days is always 5 days after the month of planting. So again, if you plant something in August, you're in growing season 1, then the acres have to be reported by September 5th for whatever was planted in the month of August. And then see in blue there, agents have 10 days to key acres and receive full commission. That's our NAU decision, and we'll show you the next slide, which breaks that out in a little more detail, but I just wanted to throw that out there right off the bat. And then because of the wide range from north to south in which annual forage is available, not all growing seasons available in every state for the planting. So you can see on the screen there, Kansas, Colorado, and Nebraska exclude the planting months of December and January, which is growing season 5 and 6, and then North Dakota, December, January, and February. So in those months, you cannot plant in those states, but Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico have all 12 available. And that's just a geographical difference. So here's the details on the commission, that how NAU is handling it. So I just put an example in there. Acreage reporting days, 5 days after the month of planting. That's the RMA rule. So again, plant on the 24th of August. Those acres have to be reported by September 5th. And then 10 days after the acreage reporting date, so in this example, 15th of September is when we would need to have all the acres entered into Easy Rider Pro, or if you're not a King agent, your hard copy would have to be delivered to your branch office for full commission. And then 15 days after acreage reporting date, or September 20th in this example, to get 50% commission, and then 20 days after acreage reporting date, September 25th, 0 commission. And then the real drop dead date, 25 days after the acreage reporting date, no more keying and no more hard copy submissions accepted, and they'll be returned when you mail them in. So there's a slide for you to take note of, and it's in the PDF, so you have it at your disposal throughout the year. But that's the decision that was made last week relative to our commission schedule and how we're handling it for annual forage in 2024 with these new growing seasons. So on with continuation with the changes. You still pick the growing season that you want coverage in by sales closing date of July 15th. So that's not changed. We just have more growing seasons. If a growing season isn't elected on the application, or if acres are not reported by the acreage reporting date, then no coverage is available or will be provided for those acres. You don't have to submit a zero acreage report if you don't plan anything in the particular month. You do not have to submit a zero acreage report, so that's a good thing. They put earliest and final plant dates in the AIB. They weren't in there before. Pretty straightforward. The earliest is September 1 and the latest is September 30th. It's just first and last day of each month. The exception is this first year, because we're making the changes from one growing series or from 4 growing seasons to 12, and they're all mixed up now. Then the first growing season for 24, the first planting date, earliest planting date is actually July 16th. So we got a few extra days on the front end on the first growing season, but from that point on, it'll always be within that month. Cat's still available. One interval for each growing season that comprises all the months. Growing season 1 includes the month of September to March. They're all 7 months long, and so it's available. If you have cat elected, you have cat for the whole policy. Not you can't pick and choose within a growing season. Cat is cat, and you have it for the whole policy for all your growing seasons. And then in blue is a really big change. Also, you no longer have to insure 100% of your insurable acres. That's added to the policy in 4A, the annual forage crop provision. So it's like PRF in that regard. And that's never been the case with annual forage, as you all know. So that's a big change. So that's, kind of ties in with the first bullet. You can select all your growing seasons. You have to select them by July 15th. But you can plan acres now, and you don't have to insure them. So if you don't report acres, even though you planted them, you just don't have any coverage. So those two kind of work in conjunction with one another. And then the dual use bullet there at the bottom. The dual use itself has not changed. The availability hasn't changed as far as where dual use is even in play. It's still the states and counties that have short rate available. And you can see the states there in the sub bullet. But now we've got 12 growing seasons, and dual use obviously is not going to be available in all of them. It's only going to be in the first 4, August, September, October, November, and it won't be November in every state. The availability of dual use is set by the final planting date for the small grains crop that you're going to short rate. So you see the very example, bottom of the very example, the final planting date for wheat in a dual use county is 10/31, then dual use would not be available in November in this county. So your dual use availability would stop in October, the date of your final plant date. So we know for now that there's some counties, at least in Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, that do have November available. There's a way to determine that. We don't have a list for you, but that rule as of the final planning date, setting the stopping start point, if you will, for where dual use is available will hold true. And then I just put some slides in here for dual use as just kind of a summary of dual use. I don't really need to spend a lot of time on this. I think most people on the webinar know how dual use works, but it hasn't changed. It used to be under the old rules, it was only available in growing season 1, but now with the months, we've got growing seasons 1 to 4, which varies that we just talked about, and we're still doing it with a statement in the annual forage special provisions. It's a number 7 now. That shows availability of dual use in the annual forage actuarials, and then when you get into the small grain crop that you're going to short rate, that shows with a premium statement that talks about when you can when you're supposed to pull the livestock off to get to be able to short rate it, and that also then sets a date for the dual use, and where we lower the coverage on the annual forage because you no longer have coverage from that point on. So I'll show you this next slide, and this again, where dual use is available, no changes there. And then I put a snip in here from this is Scott County, Kansas, and that's where you find where dual use is found. You've got the county-based value tab. If you scroll down into that, you see the grid ID options and that dual use over there on the left. And then I'm showing on the screen, I'm showing the breaking point between growing season 3 and growing season 4, where that red arrow is, and that's how you can determine if your dual use is available in that county in growing season 4. And in Scott County, Kansas, it ends at 3, so your dual use is available in growing season 1, 2, and 3. And you can just, this is the best way to tell right now if you really need to know for sure, along with that general rule that I mentioned earlier. A little bit on second crop. Always some confusion on when you can plant a second annual forage crop on the same acres on which you had a first one. And so RMA has simplified that, and they put this chart into the handbook, so this is available for you as well. But the general rule is a second annual forage crop can be planted once the last interval of the insured growing season begins. And then the same acreage cannot be planted insured in a growing season with the same index intervals in the same crop year. That's always been the rule. And what this chart does really is helps us identify and implement that rule. So the example that I put on the screen, you plant rye on October 11th, so that's growing season 3, so they report your acres by November 5th. You can see that red arrow there in growing season 3. Growing season 3's intervals, they don't show on this screen, but if you went back to the earlier one, the growing season intervals are available through the month of May. So the last interval in growing season 3 is April and May. So if you use that rule, that very top rule, the second annual forage crop can be planted once the last interval of the insured growing season begins. So that last interval is April. So that's the month that you can plant another annual forage crop on those same acres. And then the producer could start insuring those acres again in May. So you're not conflicting. You're not in the same interval as April, May. You're in May and June. So April is the date that you could plant, and you can start insuring it in May and June. And that's what this chart depicts for you. October, the second annual forage planting, and that's key. That planting that I underlined in the chart shows that you can plant then in April. You can plant in those 4 months, and not break the rule, I guess, would be the one way to look at it. That rule that's in the top bullet. So that was that clarifies that a little bit. 50%.
Patrick, can you go back to that slide? I just want to.
Yep.
You did a great job explaining it, but I just want to. In 19, we know, for those of you in Texas and I think New Mexico, there was verbiage added that allows you to go where it said, some states said, it didn't matter if it was in a new crop year. And then in Texas, it said, well, new crop year, you could just plant one behind the other. This chart here now takes over all that verbiage. None of that verbiage still exists that we saw from 19, where it talks about the changing of the crop year. This chart here now trumps anything you've seen before. So a change, a little more subtle, that didn't jump out at us like 12 growing seasons, but certainly be aware of this chart. Very handy to tell you when you can plant the second crop. Everybody wants to know. We used to use the old line of, well, as long as you've skipped an interval. All of that verbiage has been taken out. This now trumps everything we've seen in the past. So Patrick did a good job. I just really wanted to hit on that for those in Texas and I think New Mexico. Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, that was all that language is all implemented through special provision statements that were removed for this year. So this new chart directs all that now. Okay, 50% rule. This has been around in New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas since the last version of Annual Forage came about, I believe, at some point in that time frame anyway. So all they're doing now is expanding this to Nebraska and Kansas. And if you've had it before, you understand that what it does, it allows you to put 50% of your value in the first two intervals of one of the last growing seasons, and the growing seasons in which you can do that vary by state. So growing seasons 9, 10, 11, 12 for the southern states, and growing seasons 10, 11, 12 for Kansas and Nebraska. But you can put 50% of your value in the first two intervals of those last 3 or 4 growing seasons. And that allows you to basically finish up that growing season and move on to another one more quickly. And you can see the special provision statement. And this is a Kansas example. So it's got 10, 11, and 12. But the maximum percent of value in any one index interval normally in Kansas is 40%. But because of this 50% rule, if it's in growing seasons 10, 11, 12, you can put 50-50 so you can get your value burned through in two intervals, and that allows you to be done with that one and move on and into another one. So if you look at the example, you plant in June, so that's growing season 11, and you can put 50-50 in July and August and September, which I put the little red dots in on the chart. And that allows you to finish your growing season 11 with 2 intervals versus 3. And so then you can move on to another small grain crop planted in the fall. So that'd be growing season 2 in September. And then you can then it's just normal insurance, but you insure 40% or something less. But the first interval you could insure would be in October and November because of that. 50% rule allows you to be done in growing season 11 and jump up into growing season 2. So again, no changes if you've been in New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas, other than the way the growing seasons are laid out, but the same concept. And then this is probably this might have been one of the major reasons all these changes have occurred, because of some of the issues that have been going on over the years that initiated this fad they're referring to on the screen. That's been out. I don't remember how many years that's been out. We've been operating under that fad. So this was the opportunity for RMA to work all this fad language into the policies, which is what they've done. So they're going to add language in. They already have added language in the rainfall basic provisions, which is what you're seeing on the screen. I'll explain that a little bit more detail. But then our standard CCIP policy and the ARPI group plans policy basic provisions are all going to have this language added to them. So that'll be for the 24 crop year for those 630 contract change dates and the group plans coming up. But really what this fad did when they put it into play was explain how we're going to handle situations where if you've got a double cropping situation and you've got annual forage policy and you've got your standard CCIP policy, one of them has double cropping requirements in the policy, the other one doesn't. And when you're mix and matching your crops, your CCIP and your annual forage, the rule states that we're only going to follow the double cropping requirements of annual forage. There are double cropping requirements of annual forage. They're not as stringent as the ones in the regular basic provisions. So what you're seeing here is language from the rainfall index basic provisions, and it really boils down to this 6K 1 to 3, those are the requirements that have to be met when you determine whether it's going to be a first crop, second crop, or whether it's an acceptable double cropping situation. If it's a double cropping situation, you can get full payment on both. If it's not, then we got first crop, second crop rules coming into play. So the language that dictates how annual forage works hasn't changed. That was what was in the FAD. It says 6K, and you can see it's a those 1, 2, and 3 are the items that have to be met to determine whether it's double cropping or first crop, second crop. So the 6K4 and the 6L, you can see the 6K4 on this screen. That's the sequence of what 6K looks like. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But the annual forage crop provisions have a language in them that says 4 is no longer 4 and K4 and 6L are not applicable. And then 5 was added new for this year into the annual forage crop provision. So all that said and done, when it comes time to determine whether it's double cropping or first crop, second crop, then the language in 6K 1, 2, and 3, and we'll go over that in several examples that we got in our webinar. Those come into play. That's determination on which way we go on it, and then that 5 that was added is basically explaining what I tried to explain on this slide, and that if we got CCIP and rainfall policies into play, the crops are insured in one of both, then we go by the annual forage. And this is a series of Q&A that we got in our webinar and back in early part of April. I'm just going to go through these. They're really all very similar, and again, they're just driving home the point. If the requirements in 6K 1 to 3 are met, then these scenarios are likely. They're feasible, I guess. They use different terminology, but this is the first one: is you plant an annual forage crop in the fall and MPCI in the spring. Is that okay? Does that meet double cropping requirements? Are we able to pay them on both? And the answer down there at the bottom, it is generally possible. This is the AIP decision on whether these things are feasible, but most of them, well, it's just going to vary depending on where the acres are and the situation. But this one is certainly feasible. You could have your annual forage wheat for grazing and get it off in time and put cotton on it. If that's a practice that is generally acceptable in the area, that is being done on a regular basis within the area, then it's going to be okay. And so that's the first example. The next one, a little different approach. This one we're looking at you're planting your MPCI fall crop. So this was a winter crop that failed, and then you follow that with an annual forage crop in the springtime. Is that something that's feasible? And again, the answer is yes. It may meet the requirements because it's possible to take wheat to harvest and follow it with the corn for silage in the same crop year. This is talking about failed winter wheat, but the key here in number 2 is that second crop customarily planted after the first insured crop for harvest. So even though this crop didn't get harvested, the feasibility is still determined by the fact that it would be customary to take that wheat to harvest and still follow it with corn for silage. So that's not going to happen in all parts of all the states where annual forage is available, but certainly in some of the southern ones. And this is really the only one that they put the kibosh to right up off the bat. And that happened when they came out with the FAD and then the follow-up, that COM 20003 bulletin that they reference. That's the one that introduced all these new rules. And this is the one that was causing the problem. A failed spring or summer crop, following it with an annual forage crop like a hay grazer, a forage sorghum variety that's planted, and then you either hay it or graze it. This is the one that came out and said that no, it's not customary to plant a hay grazer on the same acres of cotton that are taken to harvest. So this is the one that probably caused the most problems, and the one that they've said right out of the bat that that's not feasible to do. So again, kind of summarizing these, it's an AIP call on whether they meet the test of the 1, 2, and 3, and that's what we'll be doing. And then this one takes it one step further, I guess. Got a little ahead of myself. We got one more to go. We got the annual forage and then the double crop Q&A. So a little bit different here. We got two scenarios because you got failed winter wheat crop that was covered under both a wheat policy and an annual forage dual use policy. Can then we then follow that with a spring or summer crop and receive a full indemnity on 3 policies now, because you've got on the left side you got your MPCI wheat policy followed by soybeans. So those are both CCIP, and they have to meet the double cropping requirements for that to happen. On the annual forage side, it'd be annual forage dual use followed by soybeans, and so we'd be looking at the requirements of the RI basic provisions on that one, just like we were the previous examples that we looked at. And I just put a couple slides in here just to show you what everything looks like in the actuarials. Most of you probably been out there and looked at them. On the left side, you can see a date table, shows all the dates. And again, when you get in the actuarials, we've got all these growing seasons and intervals, so they stretch out for a long time within the actuarials. You got to slide everything over to get to what you're looking for. But this is what the date tables look like and the dates that are applicable. And then the snip on the right side is just a summary of the planting months and the acreage reporting dates that coincide with the various growing seasons that are available, which we looked at earlier. And that's all in those are all in the RI handbook. And then just throwing this out here because we got it from RMA earlier in the month. No changes here, but just kind of reminder, annual forage is subject to the following reviews. Individual conflict of interest, probably the one that catches the most people on annual forage, is the $200,000 review. And as you probably know, annual forage is aggregated on the county basis for all growing seasons to get to that 200,000. So when a review is triggered, oftentimes it can be pretty late in the year before the aggregation gets to 200,000. But even though we don't have the ability to do a field inspection, we're still required to go out and look at things. So what are we going to be doing when we're doing that? We have to look at all growing seasons, basically just to see if the land was suitable for the practice that was selected. And then if there's no crop present, which oftentimes there won't be, by the time we aggregate and get to the 200,000 and realize that we need to go out and do one, a lot of the seasons have passed. But we may review records to make sure that a crop was planted and that good farming practices were carried out. I've never been involved in an annual forage review, but no changes here. Just kind of a reminder on the fact that that's still there and will continue moving forward. And just on that note, annual forage is very much in the crosshairs of RMA. They've done a lot of looking at it in the last year, and that's going to continue moving forward. So just be aware that RMA is going to have their eyes on this. They got new changes out there now. They're going to want to see how they're working and how we trained and how everything is being implemented. So just because they made the changes, it doesn't mean they're going to quit looking at it and scrutinizing it. So be aware of that. And I think with that, I'm done with the changes, and I don't know if we got any questions in the chat.
We do have one
Okay.
in the chat, Patrick, and I wasn't sure about it. I was actually going to check with Travis on it. You might know the answer though. I did not.
Well,
for 2024.
I can't see the chat yet until I quit sharing, so I can do that.
Okay, it just says, I can read it to you. It says, can you not waive part of your cotton insurance like normal? Basically, let it be a first crop, second crop, and still have an annual forage behind a failed first crop in the spring. Basically, what they said no to, as far as getting 100% of the indemnities, this question would be more of a first crop, second crop, and just taking 35% of the first one. But it's a good question, and they had multiple scenarios when RMA presented to us, but I just need to get back to it and look through it and see.
Okay, fair enough.
But you may know the answer. Like I said, I didn't know
Well,
it
I'm
offhand.
gonna err on the side of caution, but my understanding, if I understood the question right, when I get in the chat, I can read it for myself. But my understanding is that, yeah, I mean, you can still do what you're doing and get first crop, second crop. I think the problem that RMA was trying to prevent was we had people that were getting paid full on their annual forage and full loss on their CCIP crop, both, and that's what got noted and identified and scrutinized, and then put into play these rules and reminders to prevent that from happening. So my understanding is that, yeah, you can do that as long as you're aware that it is going to be first crop, second crop. But I'll look at that too, and we can get back to everybody. So I think with that, I'm ready to assign this over to you, Jeff. So I think I can do that. Make presenter. Gotta find you in the list. All right, so now you got to share yourself. Do you have the PowerPoint
Yep,
pulled up, Jeff?
I got it.
Perfect. You got
Oh,
control.
okay. Yes, I do have the PowerPoint pulled up. Okay. There. Is it now showing?
It is.
Perfect. All right. With that, like I said, any questions that you have, if you put them into the chat, like I said, Patrick will monitor it. If we don't know the answer, we'll get back to you. As with all things annual forage, it seems to be gray. They're trying to make it more black and white with the changes, but simply put your question in the chat and we will get back to you. What I'm going to go over now is just an overview of the policy. It's not nothing new. Patrick went over all the changes, but if you do come up with any questions, feel free to pop up and you can ask the group, or you can certainly put it in the chat and we'll get back to you as we can. With that, annual forage, it's a rainfall policy. No changes there. Sorry, I need to move this so I can see my screen. Monitored by NOAA, still got records going back to 1948, single peril, lack of rainfall. We're not gathering any production or how many tons you get off of it. We're not covering flood, fire, or hail. Like I said, single peril, lack of rainfall only. They do have over 6,000 reporting stations. For those of you that have been in both programs for a long time, you know that this slide used to read over 3,000 reporting stations. So they are continually adding them. But with the 12 by 12 mile grids, there is not a reporting station in every 12 by 12 mile grid. So with that, if there is not one in there, they use 4 reporting stations, use the Cressman method, and interpolate what happens in any one grid. For any one interval. May not be suitable for everywhere. That's why we have the historical indices. RMA has it on their website. We have it in our quoter. I would certainly look into that. Sometimes it just doesn't apply in certain areas. What the reporting stations are far enough away, or whatever it is, the data that's been gathered, it's not a good fit for your particular grid. That does happen. But like I said, that's why we utilize the historical indices and kind of lets us know how the policy will apply. The weather stations, everybody wants to know, well, do I have one in my grid? Do I, is how far away is one? Here's a website you can go to. This is not the only one. This might not even be the best one. If you would like to go out and look into it, you're certainly welcome. This is a site. If you have another site that you like to utilize, certainly utilize that. The policy documents have been updated as far as the blank forms. If you go out on the website, the blank forms have been updated for all the new, the 12 growing seasons and the new information needed for 2024. It has not been updated in Easy Rider Pro. We are looking to get that done by the middle of June. We are currently working on it. Now, if you were to print it out of Easy Rider Pro today, we can use them provided you add the additional information. You may need to add a column and add some additional information to make it usable in 2024 if you can't wait, like I said, another week or two for us to get it updated. We have rolled the 2023 annual forage policies into 2024, so they are out there and available. We are looking to get some new features. We were hoping it was going to be released last night. It was not, but we are hoping to get some additional features in the quoter out there that would allow you for all rainfall plans, PRF and annual forage, to be able to take a temp policy, build it in the quoter, and move it into Easy Rider Pro. We are working on some tutorials and hopefully maybe a video showing you how to do that. It is being worked on. Like I said, we just got to get it released out of test into the live system. So watch for those to come out here in the next week or two. Be reaching out to your marketing rep. And like I said, when we get those done, we'll get those out to you. It's never going to be easy, I don't think, to do an annual forage policy, but we are looking to make it easier. AF versus PRF. Two policies at work that basically use lack of rainfall as their measuring stick, but they do cover completely different crops. PRF is naturally reproducing grasses, and annual forage is exactly what it says: crops that are planted annually. So, like I said, that talks about and then and used for forage or fodder. They give a definition of those. Cannot have the same acres put on the same policy. The only one that can kind of switch between the two is alfalfa. In the initial year that it's planted, it can come in under annual forage, and then in years after that, it would fall under PRF. But like I said, can't put the same acres on under the same exact acres under the two policies in the same crop year. There is only one sales closing date, July 15th. Patrick noted earlier this year, because of where July 15th falls, you would have until July 17th. Coverage levels cover 70 to 90%. Productivity factors, as this is a group type policy, run 60 to 150%. The county base values do vary by county and state, so certainly be aware of that. Change Patrick already noted is you no longer have to put all of your annual forage acres on the policy. That's always been a deal where we had to figure out what we were going to put as cover crop and how we were going to get it through to just ensure what we wanted. Now you can just ensure what you want. So that's a big change, kind of mirrors PRF. I think this is a good thing. Please remember that there is no prevent plant, late plant, replant, high risk, any of those things. On that sales closing date at the top, July 15th, Patrick noted it. I want to hit on it a little bit harder. Any growing season that you want to be a part of, that you want to live in, must be sent in on the 15th, or in this year, the 17th. This isn't something where timely printed, timely signed is going to come into play. If you don't turn every growing season that you want to be a part of in initially, it will not be accepted at a later date. So if you turn in 10 out of the 12 growing seasons at any point in the crop year, you will only be eligible for 10 out of the 12 growing seasons. If you want to be eligible for every one that's available within your state, it will be due on the initial application. Like I said, timely printed, timely signed will not come into play on annual forage after the sales closing date window closes. So just something to be aware of. RMA was very specific on that. That is not written necessarily an NAU rule. RMA, as Patrick said, is kind of looking at annual forage, and they stood on this topic for 5 minutes in the presentation to the companies. So something to kind of be aware of. Annual forage, we know that it's expanded to 12 growing seasons, and I hit on that. Like I said, if you want to be a part of them, they must come with the initial application. Within the same growing seasons, right here it says insureds cannot elect consecutive intervals. That should say overlapping intervals, and it does in the example. Cannot elect September, October, and also October, November. This is the same mindset that comes into play in PRF, so they just can't overlap. Same mindset that has always been at play here. Same acres cannot be insured in more than one grid ID or county during a single growing season. No changes there. Specified period in which precipitation is collected. We know that, like I said, they're going to gather it on a monthly basis. You have 6 intervals per growing season to become a part of. Patrick went over kind of the 50% rule. It talks about here how many intervals you need to be in and a part of. Excuse me, sorry. Apologize for that. The month within the intervals can overlap, and each interval acts as a mini growing season or a mini insurance period. Percent of value, this isn't a change in the mindset. We've had this for several years. We no longer say we're going to put 100 acres in this interval. We say that we're going to put a percent of the total acres into this interval. The percents in each interval must be even numbers, even by can't be 17.3. It can be 17 or 18, but can't put decimals, and it must add up to an even 100% when you're done. The maximum in any one in Colorado and Kansas is 40. Other than when those 50% intervals apply that Patrick talked about earlier. That's the only time that those can be adjusted. This just kind of breaks it down by state. The minimum is always 10%. Like I said, other than when the 50% rules apply, so kind of be aware of those. Just kind of tells you how you can break down those percents of value. Here's very good image of what we were just talking about. Patrick went over this. It was in his changes section. If you are going to utilize the 50% rule in those final growing seasons, they're applicable for Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico in 9, 10, 11, and 12. That has been what it's been for several years. Kansas and Nebraska is new, and it's allowing those 50% intervals in 10, 11, and 12. So very good slide to keep aware of kind of as we move through this. Annual forage units, other than cat coverage, are divided by growing season, index interval, share, grid ID in the county within the assigned grid. Cat coverage, it shows there. We don't have a lot of those policies. One application covers all the growing seasons. I've hit on this already. Name of the crop is annual forage. Plan of insurance rainfall covers your 70 to 90%, your productivity factors, your intended uses. We'll go over those in just a little bit. They do have very specific intended uses for this policy. Make sure we break the percents of value and the point of reference. Those will not come until your acreage reporting day. So, like I said, all we need initially is the growing seasons you want to be in, the coverage levels. Like I said, the point of reference and the acres and the FTFs will not be due until the acreage reporting date. This slide popped. Yes, sir.
Just on that last slide, we had a question in the chat about adding more acres, later in the year. And basically the question is, do the grid IDs have to be identified at sales closing? So if they added ground that's in a different grid later in the year, can they still cover it? And the simple answer to that is that, as you just mentioned, the grids, we don't need the grids at application time. They come in at acreage reporting time. So you should be able to add acres that are in a grid that you weren't planning on being in, because we don't need those until the acreage reporting time.
Yeah, if they come up with new acres or something during the crop year, like I said, that's okay. That can be added, as Patrick said, and like this last line bullet point points out to. Those are all due at acreage reporting time. Like I said, we'll have one of those on the 5th of every month. The main reason is that I hit on it as hard as I did earlier, and we'll hit on it here right now on the growing seasons, is the 12 growing seasons you wish to be a part of, and then what intervals you want to be a part of within those growing seasons. Coverage levels, those are the things that must be elected at sales closing. But like I said, FTF, grid ID, points of reference, those things can be added at acreage reporting. So hopefully that answered the question. This one, I hit on the flow chart the chart that Patrick showed earlier when he was going through the changes, where he talked about when you could plant, and it gave a very nice chart on when you could plant as far as additional growing seasons for annual forage. This one talks about exactly what months you'll be covering within a particular growing season. So like I said, I like that. We hit on how they can't overlap, but they can be consecutive. This is just a very good chart that you can follow down. And if I'm going to get into November, exactly what months can I cover? You can look at it. Like I said, whether you're in North and South Dakota and you need to be in 2, or whether you're in farther south and you need to be in 3, this kind of lets you visually see. It's a very good visual representation of the intervals that are available to you. Farm track and field number, we will have to have that, just as we've always had to have. You can pick and choose which growing seasons to be in. I made a big deal about if you want to be in all of them, getting them on there. If you know that you're just going to be in these two, just put two. It's going to take a little work to set up an annual forage policy. And if you know that you are not going to be outside of those two, just set those two up. But just know there will be no second guessing later on, is kind of what I wanted to hit on. We know that you're not required to, for 2024 and forward, not required to report 100% of the acreage. That is a nice change. Going to have to turn in farm, track, and field. Got to have it all. Going to need to know the intended use. Like I said, we're going to go over those here in just a little bit. And the crop type. That's information that you will be putting on the acreage report.
Hey, Jeff.
Acreage reporting. Yes, sir.
Hey, this is Pat Milford, compliance. On that reporting on the FSA, also under COI and high dollar reviews, we have them urge their farmers to get that certified as soon as they can, because we do have to verify acres with FSA on those type of reviews.
Okay. I mean, but they would, but there would be other ways to verify those acres as well, correct?
I suppose under
there's multiple areas that wouldn't report to FSA.
Releases,
so
yeah, deeds releases would, in that case, would work. So
yes.
Okay.
So like I said, perfect. Thank you, sir. Annual forage acreage reporting requirements must include for each growing season. You got to have the intended use. As you can read down through there, there is going to be a definition for each one of those intended uses. So like I said, we need to make sure that we're getting that on the acreage report. Annual forage, the crop type, there's a list of crops here in a little bit, as well as unlisted commodities. If the irrigation practices are available, the planting dates, as Patrick mentioned earlier, it's going to go July 16th to September 5th on this first one. And then after that, they will be 31 day requirements going forward. The grid ID and points of reference are available. They're available on the ROA website. They're also available from within our website. So like I said, those are things that will be needed on the acreage report. And as always, farm, track, and field is mandatory. These are the different intended uses that are available out there. Notice that none of those say for grain, unless you're in a dual use area. Annual forage commodity types here gives a list of all the, get a lot of questions on why or what crops are available. Here's a list, and it also says just because it's not on this list does not mean it is not covered. They have unlisted commodities that we can certainly look at on an individual basis and find out if we can have coverage on those. Here are the definitions. Like I said, as you work through these for use, I'm not going to read those to you. It does say grain grazing here. These are for your dual use areas. Kind of gives definitions of what silage, haying, and harvest, what those definitions are. Once again, I'm not going to read those to you. Cap protection, 65% coverage level, 45% productivity factor. Just as with all cap policies, it costs $655 per year, not per growing season. And it just does cover the entirety. You just get one growing season that runs from September through the end of March. Annual forage. These next two slides kind of get busy. I don't know whether to read them. I can kind of go over them a little bit, give an overview of them. If you have questions, like I said, this presentation will be available for you to refer back to. In this example, annual forage versus RP, YP example, the insured currently has an RP wheat policy. He takes out an annual forage policy on July 15th. He will plant 500 acres of wheat for grazing and 500 acres of wheat for grain in September. The producer could take out the annual forage policy by July 15th and insure 500 acres of wheat for grazing under the annual forage policy, and then report them on the annual forage acre report with the intended use of grazing. What happens whenever you do this, make sure that if there is a corresponding RP policy, you need to put those acres that are on the annual forage policy on the revenue yield policy. And that's what it's saying here. The producer would also need to insure 500 acres of wheat for grain, because that's what he said he was going to do, and report the AF acres as uninsurable on the RP acreage report. So you note them. You don't have to put the RP acres on the annual forage policy, but you do have to put the annual forage acres on the RP policy. Production from the wheat harvested is grain that was not grazed and wheat that was grazed, but cattle pulled off prior to the short rate date in those dual use areas can be part of the APH database. This talks about dual use. Patrick hit on that. In a lot of areas, growing seasons 1 through 4, but be aware of those final plant dates. If the final plant date does not enter into growing season 4, then dual use will not be available in growing season 4. And you can look that up in the actuarials. And then the bottom example just talks about you could have oats for grazing under annual forage and wheat for grain under RP. Here's another one, the corn silage. There are a handful of counties as you get in various states that do allow corn silage under the revenue policy. So if the silage type is insurable under multi-peril policy in the county, a producer cannot have both an MPCI policy and an annual forage policy with corn listed as an annual forage commodity. All the acres of corn within that county must be under one plan or the other. So, like I said, just something to kind of be aware of, something to keep track of if corn for silage is available under a multi-peril policy. If the silage type is not insurable in the county under the corn MPCI policy, the insured can obtain an AF policy and a corn MPCI policy if true silage only type of corn is planted. This example here, I think, is a good one. I read over it several times. I would certainly kind of keep track of it. So what they're saying here, report the uninsurable corn for grain on the MPCI policy, and report the corn for silage on the MPCI policy as uninsurable, and then report the silage only type acres under the annual forage policy. So as far as where you put the acres, the same mindset they used for the wheat on the slide before. But intended use cannot be used to attain both policies. Simply saying corn will be harvested as silage does not entitle them to both. So what they're going to be checking here is that the corn that you planted was a silage type variety. So so just like I said, a good example. I know it's, like I said, they're trying to get much more specific examples that they have not had in years past. So like I said, this is a good slide that I thought to kind of keep track of as these questions come up throughout the year. Annual forage and new breaking native sod. The new breaking native sod provisions do apply to annual forage. So like I said, 2024 crop year, new breaking native sod acres will need to have been tilled or chemically destroyed on or before July 15th. Otherwise, the native sod rules, as you can see in those states there, would apply. Those, so kind of something to be aware of. Annual forage summary. This just talks about, this is just an overview talking about, make sure that we're filling out the productivity factor and coverage levels per growing season. There are 6 intervals per growing season for you to get into. I mentioned this earlier. You do have to be in at least 2 in South Dakota, North Dakota, and at least 3 in the rest of the states, other than the 50% rule that Patrick made note of, the 50% rule exception for those final growing seasons, different in each one of those states, different in Kansas and Nebraska than it is in Texas and Oklahoma, and New Mexico doesn't show up there, but it should. So, like I said, just some things there. Any questions on the overview of the policy? I know I went through it fairly quickly. The basics of the policy are what they are. It's still a single peril lack of rainfall policy. With that, Patrick, like you said, I can't see questions.
Yeah, you can probably quit sharing now, Jeff, but we do have questions in the chat. So
Okay.
I think we handled the first 2. I'm gonna double check on that one from Matt on the waiving your cotton insurance and do the first crop, second crop. I'm pretty sure that's good. And then the one about basically we don't need the grid ID at application time. That comes later. And then are we requiring all insurers to sign a new app by July 17th? Will the old ones be rolled in with the new info? And the answer to that is, yeah, we're going to have a new application signed. We can only roll growing season 1. That's the only growing season that where we have a direct match from what we've had in the past, because of the way the growing seasons change and the months are involved. So we're only going to be able to roll from last year's growing season 1 to this year's growing season 1, and then those enhancements that Jeff was talking about, where we're gonna, I think we're calling it a copy. I put my notes up here. We're gonna have a copy and add that will hopefully expedite some of this. As Jeff said, it's not going to be easy. We're going to make it easier, but it's not going to be easy. There's just no way to roll everything over with what they did. So everybody's going to have to get a new application signed and get all your new growing seasons on that application between now and the 17th. Next question. Why does our NAU require point of reference if all acres must be reported at FSA Farm Tract and Field? No other AIP we work with asks for a point of reference. My understanding is
RMA mandate.
RMA
They must be
requirement,
picking it
yeah.
up. Yeah.
They must be doing it for them somehow.
Which our system will do that as well. That's an RMA mandate, so they are putting it on there for you. We do have automated points of reference now, so you can simply click a button once you get done with the acreage report, and it will apply the points of reference and put it on the acreage report. So they are gathering those, I can assure you. But ours is much easier than it has been in the past. With PRF following through with PRF there last fall, they made it. They made the automated points of reference, so that is much easier to add to your acreage report at this time.
Okay, can you choose different levels of coverage per different crops or growing seasons? Example, 90% coverage level on rye and 85% on Sudan. You cannot have different coverage levels by the crops that you're insuring under annual forage. You can have different coverage levels per growing season. Am I right, Jeff?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah,
Nope. That's spot on.
All right. Can you state again what are the other ways of verifying acres if insured decides not to report acres to FSA?
That would just be dependent upon the situation. Like I said, if they don't report to FSA, as Pat was mentioning earlier, may have to go to deeds, lease agreements. It would just depend on the individual situation, maybe tax records, tax statements.
Part of the trouble, Jeff, also is we have to verify type of crop, and I've never had one that wasn't on FSA, but somehow we verify the acres, but also I don't know if they could add what type of crop it is to the deed or lease, but we do have to verify which type of crop it was. And that's usually on the FSA, so I'm not sure on deeds and leases how they would do that.
There was a slide earlier in the presentation that talked about if, obviously if a review is to come up, the review is aggregated throughout the year. So like I said, maybe if you had 100,000 in growing season 1 and then another 100,000 in another growing season, those earlier acres would not be available to look at, just as Pat said. But it said that we would then go to the farmer to ask for, seed receipts, records that showed good farming practices were utilized to, because it wouldn't be available for us to visually verify. So I was just, like I said, I was reading that off of RMA's off the presentation they gave. So I assume those things would be handled on an individual basis. Like I said, but that's what they said as far as how they would verify planted acres behind us that could not be visually verified, is that they would ask for seed receipts and different things like that, showing that it was planted and showing that good farming practices were utilized.
Okay, I'll check going forward to see what they want to do on reviews, but not necessarily physically verifying, but to verify what crop was planted. We went by, as the review came up, by what was listed on FSA, the type of crop, whether it be rye, wheat, or what it might be. So I'll have to see how they want to do it otherwise if they don't certify.
Yeah, and that'd just be something we have to get with compliance. Like I said, with some new information coming from RMA, they might just not have had the opportunity to address the situation yet.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, next question. The intended use is as of acreage reporting date, but the final use can change without affecting the policy, correct? And that would be correct as long as the intended use is something that's
right. As long as the
insurable under
intended
annual
use
forage.
matches, right. As long as you go back and you utilize one of the intended uses that are available for the policy. There was a list there on one of those slides. As long as you're utilizing an intended use that is available to the policy, then it wouldn't affect it.
Yeah, I think the general term is got something for feed or forage, or feed or fodder, I think is a term in the policy. So that have to be something that would fall under that general one, and then the intended uses that Jeff just referred to. On your statement regarding annual forage grazing acres needing reported on the RE policy as uninsurable, is that an RMA requirement or AIP? That would be an RMA requirement. Anytime you're planting something that's uninsurable for whatever reason, you got to report insurable and uninsurable acres.
Yep.
All right. Does a cause of loss factor in? If a cotton crop is hailed out early, we still cannot plant hay grazer and run the annual forage behind it. Does cause of loss play any role? I think that probably goes, not the answer you probably want to hear, but it probably goes into just that general answer of looking at each individual scenario on its own and applying that 6K 1, 2, and 3 to the scenario. I mean,
it goes back to the statement that Patrick said is if the initial crop could have been planted and harvested, and then you would have normally planted the annual forage behind it. I think that's the statement you're probably looking for, Patrick.
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. So I guess, no, the cause of loss doesn't really play a role in it. I think. Oh, no.
There's one more here. Yeah.
Oh, two more. So, since actuarials list that there are no types specified on type and no commodity type specified in commodity type and no intended use specified, no irrigation practice specified, well, why do we have to clear this info on the acreage report? Those are required elements on the acreage report per RMA. But it does seem kind of silly. They have all those, RMA has all those categories, if you will, all those fields in their actuarial documents and on all their requirements, and they're not all applicable, obviously, to all plans and types. So you make a good point. Do we have a plan for a blank application with coverage lines for 12 growing seasons? What do you know about that? Do you know what all exactly we got?
Those are out there and available today. My understanding. There's the blank paperwork is out there on the website available. I think as of the middle of last week. What we are working on is if you were to build or do something from within the system, printing it out of Easy Rider Pro is what is not available today. That's what we're hoping to have out by the middle of the month. But as far as you just setting down and starting in by hand, you can do that today. If you can't find it, like I said, get with your underwriter. Those should be available today.
Yeah, you're right there, Jeff. All right.
Okay, and Matt, going back to your question, I checked with Travis, the manager for the entire southern region, on your question, and I just asked him. I said, for 2024 annual forage, failed spring crop, and then plant AF crop, you can't get 100% payment, but you can apply for first crop, second crop, correct? And he said yes. So your scenario on your initial question, the answer is yes, you still can do that. Most of the scenarios that RMA put out were, how can we get 100% of multiple payments? So, but your initial question, Travis agreed with, Matt.
All right, thanks for checking with Travis on that. And I guess I think that's it.
Yeah.
So with that,
I'm just going to tell them one more time, Patrick, just for a reminder for all of you on the call, if you didn't hear it initially, the presentation that we gave today that Patrick put together is available on the website. If you go to the training tab and down to the help library, it will say 2024 annual forage. It's the third or fourth one down. So the entire presentation that was just given is available out there. And then kind of be on the lookout for additional trainings on the availability of being able to use create a temp app from the quoter. And that's all I have, Patrick. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your help, Jeff. And thanks for participating, everyone. If you have questions, contact your marketing rep, your underwriter, me, and we'll try and get them answered for you as quickly as we can. And like Jeff said, keep your eyes open for our enhancements that will make this change as easy as we can make it for you, realizing that it's not going to be as easy as any of us would like it to be, but we'll do what we can to ease the pain of the rollover from the 23 annual forage into the changes for 24. So with that, have a good rest of the day and weekend, and we will talk to you somewhere down the road. Thanks, everybody.